Hi, I'm Neil Nobel. I'm editor-at-large of the Prickly Pear, and welcome to the Cactus Patch. And with us today is Jason Bedrick, an educational specialist who's going to be talking about education. Jason, thank you for coming by.
Thanks so much for having me.
Just a heads up, this is going to be mostly an interview. Rather than an interview, it's going to be mostly a presentation by Jason with questions on occasional by me, but otherwise we're going to let him hold the floor. Jason is director of policy for EdChoice. Previously, Jason had served as policy analyst with the Cato Institute Center for Educational Freedom. He also served as a legislator in the New Hampshire House of Representatives and was the Education Policy Research Fellow at the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy. His writings have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the National Review, National Affairs, and Education Next, among many publications. Jason received his master's degree in public policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where he was a fellow at the Taubman Center for State and Local Government. And Jason is an expert in education. We're really happy to have you with us and give us an update on the state of education in Arizona, and particularly the state of school choice in Arizona.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me. So I'll jump right into this presentation here. We'll go back to the A Nation at Risk report, which was released in 1983, which concluded that if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. Now, I think this is a bit melodramatic, but it was raising an important point, which was that our system was not only stalling in terms of educational progress, but was actually relatively mediocre relative to international standards among the advanced nations in the West. Here is a report that Harvard released in 2012 based on the 2009 PISA, which is an international assessment. You can see the green line here is the US average. You actually have to go all the way to the second slide to see where the US average is, pretty far down. If you go back, you can see that the orange lines are broken down by state. So Massachusetts does quite well, but most states do not. There's Arizona, below average. All the way there at the bottom, just between Thailand and Mexico, is Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, which spends about $31,000 per pupil to get the worst results in the entire United States. And you can see that since then, not much has changed. The United States still ranks pretty far down among, advanced nations on the 2018 PISA. And this is not because we're not spending as much. If you take a look at this, any nation that is in the top left quadrant is a nation that has higher performance than we do, but spends less per pupil than the United States does. So it's not that we're spending less than these other nations. It's got to be something else. And as a matter of fact, even among U.S. states, this is a study of whether or not increases in spending per pupil improve our performance on tests. And as you can see, it's all over the map. There are some states that spend a lot more without additional results. There are some states that get much better results, like Florida, without spending that much more. And then, it's sort of all over the map. So there's no real correlation here between increasing your spending and improving your performance.
Well, if I might interject for just
yes.
a moment, it seems like in terms of public arguments here in Arizona, we're always being accused of not spending enough, and that we're on the low end, and therefore that's the reason for our rather flaccid performance. But that really is not the case. There's no correlation between spending and output. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. And this is a consistent finding going back decades, that there's just not real strong evidence that's the case. As a matter of fact, if you look at this is a report from Cato looking at the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress for 17-year-olds. So this is sort of your cumulative exam after 12 years of education. And we can see that since 1970, test scores have essentially been flat but the amount we're spending per pupil has pretty much tripled.
Oh my
So the amount, and this is adjusted for inflation in 2010 dollars. So the amount that we were spending per pupil from K through 12 was about $57,000 per pupil. And then by 2010, it was $164,000 per pupil. It's obviously much more now, but we don't have more recent long-term NAEP data. So where's all this money going? Well, it looks like it's actually not going really to the classroom. So here you can see student spending has quadrupled since 1960, but the total number of students has about doubled. The total number of school personnel has increased by 380%. This is from 1950 to 2015. You can see that teachers have gone up about 250%, but it's the non-teaching staff, about a 700% increase in the non-teaching staff. That's where the funding is really going.
All right, so you could argue maybe here that the money is not going to the classroom. That's why we're not seeing a correlation between spending and results. But actually, there has been a substantial increase in teacher salaries as well.
Well, actually, no, I wouldn't say there's an increase in teacher salaries. That is an increase in spending on teachers. If you look at teacher salaries for the last couple of decades, they've essentially been flat. So they're increasing the number of teachers to keep up with the increasing number of students. But what they're really doing is the new spending, the new money that's coming in is mostly being spent on non-teaching staff. That's the prime driver of spending right now. But just the status report: flat, mediocre achievement, rising spending, falling productivity, and a much more bloated bureaucracy. So the question is, well, what's the way out? How do we improve a system like this? Well, Milton Friedman, who founded the organization that I work for, said a long time ago, school vouchers. He said, there's a case to be made that the government should be subsidizing education. We have a democracy. We have self-government. In order to have self-government, you need to have an educated populace. But there's always the possibility that some child, through no fault of his own, is born to a family that does not have the means to provide him or her with a high-quality education. So there is a case that the state should make sure that there's a quality of opportunity, that everybody has access to a quality education. Friedman's insight, though, was it does not follow from this that the government should also be administering the schools. There's a case that they should fund education, but not that they should actually run the schools.
An interesting distinction.
Yeah, and he points out there's 4 ways to spend money. You can spend your own money or somebody else's money. You can spend that money on yourself or somebody else. When you're spending your money, you have a strong incentive to economize, right? Less so than if you're spending someone else's money. If you're spending on yourself, you have a much stronger incentive to maximize value. Not only that, the closer a person is to you, the better able you are to maximize value. Right? You think of spending money on your spouse versus spending money on a total stranger. You're going to have a much better idea of what your spouse needs and wants versus somebody that you've never met. Our education system is essentially people spending other people's money on other people. And so what Friedman proposed was that we try to move to a voucher system where, yes, they're spending other people's money, but at least they're spending it on themselves. They have a much better ability and incentive to maximize the value that they're getting out of that education spending. So since Friedman has proposed this, and this goes back to the 1950s, really there's been school choice programs, a few of them in the United States since the late 1860s. But really things took off starting around 1990. We now have, this is a little out of date, 65. There was a new program passed this year. So 65 private school choice programs in 29 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico. And you can see that the numbers have really shot up over the last 2 decades, particularly the last decade. And here we're talking about voucher programs where the money follows the child to a private school, tax credit scholarship programs like we have here in Arizona, where individual or corporate taxpayers make a contribution to a scholarship organization and then receive a tax credit for that. The tax credit and deduction programs, or we're talking about individual tax credits or deductions that people are taking for their own child's tuition, slightly different than what we have in Arizona. An education savings account, sort of the new kid on the block, pioneered right here in Arizona, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. First, I want to talk a bit about the evidence for voucher programs and to a lesser extent tax credit scholarships. Most of these studies, though, were done on school voucher programs. The first question is, well, what's the effect on the students who participate? And what you see here is that the vast majority of studies find that students perform as well or better than their non-voucher peers. And so these are random assignment trials, sort of like with medicine, right? You take a large group of people, you randomly divide them into two different groups. One group gets the treatment, one group does not, and then you compare the difference in outcomes. So here you have a whole bunch of people who apply for a voucher, and then through a lottery, some randomly receive it, some randomly do not. You then compare those two groups. And you can see that in most cases, there's actually an improvement in performance. And then in a number, there's no visible effect between, no visible difference between the two groups. You also see that there are a few outliers, particularly in Louisiana, which has a very high regulation program that was so overregulated that 2/3 of the private schools chose not to participate. When you compare those two groups, the schools that did not participate had enrollment that was increasing before the program was enacted on average. And those schools that did not participate, those schools that chose to participate had on average enrollment that had been decreasing. So what you essentially find is that it was the lower performing schools that were willing to jump through the hoops because they needed students, and it was the higher performing schools that chose not to participate.
So Louisiana is kind of an outlier.
Louisiana is an outlier. Yeah. Another question is, well, what about the attainment? Test scores is one measure. It's an important measure. It's far from the only important thing, but it is something you can measure. Attainment, are they graduating from high school? Are they going on to college? You see that there are, even in Louisiana, there was no negative effect. And in most cases, actually, you're having positive effects. Another question is, well, what happens to the public schools? And you hear this is probably the number one argument you hear. Well, it's great for the kids who get access to a school choice program, but what about those kids who are quote unquote left behind in the public schools, right? It's going to drain resources from the public schools. The families that are most interested in education are going to leave. The schools are going to be left with less resources and the hardest kids to teach, and it's just going to be a disaster. What we find is actually quite the opposite. In almost every single case, there is a small but statistically significant positive effect, even in Louisiana, on the performance of public schools as a result of the increased choice and competition. You always have some sort of outlier. So we did find one outlier in Florida, although most of the studies of Florida, you can see, found positive effects. So anytime you have research, you're going to have just some outliers randomly. That's probably just an outlier. And here, there's even more on the second page here. So this is actually one of the most robust findings that we have, is that school choice programs actually have a positive effect. As a matter of fact, if you look at Florida, Florida has the largest school choice program in the country. More than 100,000 low-income students are participating. And the University of, or I think Florida State University has been doing a longitudinal study. And what they find is that the students who are entering the program, these again, all low-income students, and about 70% non-white, these students tend to have lower test scores than their demographic peers before they enter the program. So in other words, when you hear this idea, well, these programs are doing well because they're creaming, right? The private schools are creaming, they're choosing the best students. That's actually not the case. Students that are doing well, their parents tend to leave them in the public school system. It's the students that aren't thriving in the public school system who the parents are saying, we need to go find some other option that's a better fit for them. So it's not that, it's the dumb kids, quote unquote, that are leaving. It's kids that this environment is not working for them. They need a different environment. And then once they're in the program, after a few years, they tend to be performing at the national average, which means they're outscoring their demographic peers. And the longer they're in the program, the more improvement that they see. So let's move now to Arizona. Arizona has a number of different types of educational choice options. First, we have open enrollment. That's where you can go to another district school that is outside of your zoned district. So you might live in Chandler, but send your kids to Scottsdale Unified. You also have charter schools. These are public schools that are open to anybody, but without any geographic borders. And they're also exempt from certain state regulations. They are also privately managed, even though they are public schools open to all. Tax credit scholarships, we discussed these a little bit toward the beginning. And education savings accounts, which we'll get into right now. So what is this all about? So Milton Friedman said, how do we know how education will develop? Why is it sensible for a child to get all his or her schooling in one brick building? Why not let them spend part of a voucher for math in one place and English or science somewhere else? Why can't a student take some lessons at home, especially now with the availability of the internet? This is sort of the idea behind the education savings account. Instead of a voucher, which is like a coupon, if you have a $5,000 voucher, you redeem it all in one place at one time, one private school. In this case, you have an education savings account. It's like a private restricted use bank account, but parents can use it for a wide variety of approved educational expenses. So things like private school tuition, but also tutoring, textbooks, homeschool curricula, online learning, educational therapy for students who have special needs. And then you can save for future expenses. This brings you much closer. It's not exactly category one spending, but because you are able to spend it in multiple areas, you're not creating a price floor, right? And because you're able to save it, you can treat it like it is income, like it is your own money. So there is a much stronger incentive to economize in addition to maximize your value. And because you can spend it in all these different ways, you have a greater ability to maximize the value. So this is really cutting edge when it comes to education policy. Going back to Arizona, we'll get into all those in a minute. Arizona has the most robust educational choice environment in the entire country. So here, this is a study of Maricopa County, which is about 60% of the state. And you can see that 31% of students in Maricopa County are using district school open enrollment. So they're attending a public school that is outside of their zone district. You've got about 16% that are in charter schools. So that's for a total of 47%. Then you have about another 6% that are using either an ESA or a tax credit scholarship. So you actually have and then there's a few more percent, about 3% that are homeschooling. So you actually have a majority of students in Maricopa County exercising educational choice, attending a learning environment besides their assigned school.
Wow.
And we've seen real incredible charter school growth over the last decade or so. Here you see in 2011, about 125,000 students, and 2017, you had about 185,000 students. So really tremendous growth. Arizona has the highest number of students per capita in charter schools in the entire country.
Are there waiting lists to get into these schools?
In some cases, yes. Places like Basis, Great Hearts, some of them have considerable waiting lists.
So these numbers might actually be even greater if there was capacity.
That's right. Absolutely.
Wow.
Here's a study from Hamilton, which is a part of the Brookings Institution, where they're looking at the percentage of students with access to a local charter school. Access means that you have at least one charter school in your zip code, 84% in Arizona. So by far the most access. And I think this even really understates things because For some of these places around the country, you might just have one charter school in your zip code, whereas in Arizona, you might have two, three, five, or more. Again, this is now a few years out of date, but Arizona, again, far and away the highest percentage of students in the charter sector in the entire country, blows everybody else out of the water. And it has an effect on our open enrollment as well. So take this is a map of Ohio, for example. Ohio also has open enrollment, but look at these little circles, these green donuts that where it says no open enrollment. You can see where they are. They're right around Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, Cleveland. What's going on here? Well, essentially, this is the suburbs just outside the city saying, well, we don't want those city kids coming to our schools. Now, here's a map of Arizona. In green, you see all the districts that participate in open enrollment. And you'll see that it's the entire state. So again, even places like Scottsdale, you might think, well, Scottsdale is going to say, well, we don't want some of those students coming in from certain parts of Phoenix. No, because you have a growing charter sector, and there are families that are in Scottsdale that are either using the ESA or using the charter schools or tax credit scholarships. You have a lot of open spaces in the public school system. And so they then open their doors to all sorts of other communities. So there is this virtuous cycle where, because of competition, opening up these spaces. And we can see that it's actually, it's improving the public school system. You can see over time, the percentage of students that are passing the AZ merit exam is going up considerably. And the path is really, I would say, being led by the charter sector, right? So you can look at the district schools in 2015, 33% pass, 44% among the charter sector. By 2018, district schools improve to 39%, charters improve all the way up to 50%, right? So, things are improving in both sectors and improving at a higher rate or high level with the charter sector. This map, this chart is a little confusing, but essentially this is the gains on the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is considered the nation's report card from 2009 to 2015. And you can see that nationally, this is 4th and 8th grade math, 4th and 8th grade reading, and 4th and 8th grade science. And you can see improvement, a little bit of improvement in the public schools, the blue bars, the public schools nationwide. The yellow bars are Arizona's district schools. The Arizona flag is the Arizona average, but that way in the back there, that's the Arizona charters. And
wow,
so you can see
they're really doing a job.
Yeah, so these are the students that are really, they're really showing growth over time. And that's one of the great things about a charter system is people say, well, what a charter, you got bad charters, sometimes charters close down. Yes, well, Milton Friedman pointed out that, when you have a market, you have a system of profit and loss, and the loss is important. When you have a poor performing district school, it just stays open for decades. You can throw money at it, you can throw more money at it. Usually not much changes. When a charter school is not performing well, parents choose away from the school and the school's closed down. When a charter is performing really well, then it attracts more people and they can increase their enrollment, open new campuses. And so what you end up having is this sort of feedback mechanism that rewards good performance. And so what you see over time is tremendous improvement. And look, it's not just the level of growth, it's actually at the actual level. You remember from that first slide, we saw that of all the states, Massachusetts was doing the best. Our charter sector is performing at the same level as Massachusetts. I mean, 297, 296, statistically no different. What is the difference? We're spending half as much per pupil as they're spending in Massachusetts. And whereas they have a majority white population, we have a majority minority population. It really shows what the charter sector can do. Here again is the 2017 NAEP results. Look at the national average in green here. Arizona has improved considerably. That first map where we show you where we were, toward the bottom, was from 2011 on the PISA. This is 2017. Arizona's had tremendous growth since then. We are now just below the national average, but look at our charter sector. We actually beat Massachusetts this year, or this most recent exam, by a considerable amount. So Arizona's charter sector is just knocking the socks off of everybody. You know, and how much are we spending in the district schools? Well, you know, if you listen to Red for Ed, they're going to tell you it's like $3,000 or something like that. What they do is they exclude all local spending, they exclude all federal spending, they exclude all add-on spending. You know, so things like for low-income students or Title I, you know, for students with special needs, English language learners, they exclude all that. They just look at the base and they say, oh, we're not spending enough. Actually, we are spending about $11,000 per pupil right now in our district schools. And again, this comes from the Arizona Auditor General's report.
I have to interject here. I mean,
Sure.
if Arizona schools are performing on par with Massachusetts, which is near the top, for half the money, why are we considered in the press to be some sort of backwater as it applies to educational outcomes?
Yeah. So it's our charters. So again, if you look at this, our charter schools are performing at the same level as Massachusetts, but and they'll say, oh, the charters are creaming. Well, the charters can't cream because the charters can't have admission standards. The charter schools, if they have oversubscription, they have to hold a lottery. So overall, we are just below average, but showing tremendous growth. The charter sector is doing really well. When they say that we are last in the nation, what they're talking about is spending. They're talking about spending per pupil. And first of all, they exclude a whole bunch of categories of spending when they do that. Second of all, they don't adjust for cost of living. Okay. Because in other states, they spend a lot more than us and don't even get that much extra. So look at this. This is our performance on the NAEP versus New York. And you can see, look at Arizona, tremendous growth over this period. New York, pretty much flat, goes up a little, down a little, but you know, pretty much flat. What's the difference? We in 2017 were spending $9,000 per pupil, and New York was spending 23. And this, by the way, is just instructional spending. If you do total spending, and that's the whole state, total spending right now in New York City exceeds $30,000 per pupil.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
So again, the charter schools are spending less than the district schools, but they're getting a lot more bang for their buck. And Arizona's ESAs, for special needs students, it's a lot more, but it's always 90% of the state portion for a child. But for a non-special need child, again, they're spending just over $6,000, so considerably less than what they're spending at the district schools or even at the charter schools. Still, you hear, oh, well, these ESAs, which the other side calls vouchers, they only benefit the wealthy. That's actually not the case. So, you know, they say, well, it's only wealthy families that can make up the difference between the ESA and the private school education. Well, that might be the case if you're talking about elite private schools, but most of the private schools actually have there's a median tuition that's around what the median ESA award is. You know, and yes, it's a little bit more for high school, but if you can save that money over the years, you can apply for financial aid, you can make up the difference. Even very low income families can actually make up the difference. And if you look at where the students, the ESA students are, we don't have data on the participants, but we can see what districts they're from. The top 10 districts with ESA students actually have considerably higher rates of child poverty than the state average.
Yeah, it looks like Indian reservation areas.
Yes, a lot of Native Americans are participating in the ESA program. Wow. And if you look at this, you know, students from high or low poverty districts, whether they're on the ESA or attending a district school, statistically, there's really no difference. So we're you know, they are educating a broad spectrum of the population. Anyway, More importantly, though, is parental satisfaction. So this was a study. This was from the first year of the program. The ESA is open to a whole bunch of different types of students. The first year of the program, it was only students with special needs. That's when the survey was conducted. Since then, we've added students who are assigned to a low-performing public school, students who are on Native American reservations, the children of active duty military personnel, or those killed in the line of duty, foster kids, and a few other categories. What you saw was that when you asked them how satisfied were you with the school that you were attending, your child was attending before, fewer than half, and you had to be switching out of a public school, fewer than half said that they were satisfied with the public school education they were receiving before. Now, that doesn't mean fewer than half of the families in those schools are satisfied. Probably most of them are satisfied, but this is a certain segment of the population that left. They weren't happy. And they were universally satisfied with the education they were able to get with the ESA. 90% said they were satisfied or very satisfied. So, I mean, and actually, if you break this down by income, I should have grabbed that slide as well. If you break this down by income, it was the lowest income families who were the least satisfied with their previous school, and who were the most likely to say they were very satisfied with the education they could provide using the ESA.
I think that's a great point for us to kind of get close to the end on. Let's put it that way. What is the state, in your opinion, of school choice in Arizona right now, given the structure of our legislature?
I think we are in really good shape right now. That could change. If you look at the legislators who are pro school choice versus anti school choice, there are thin majorities in both chambers, and there's the governor. So I think that the programs are not in danger this year, and we could actually even see some expansion. But if things change, yes, they could certainly be in danger. So families need to be cognizant that you may not be interested in politics, but politics are interested in you.
Yeah.
And then here are some resources for anybody who's interested. My organization, EdChoice, of course, the Goldwater Institute, Center for Arizona Policy, the Educational Freedom Institute, American Federation for Children, and the Arizona Charter Association. I also draw their attention to this great organization called loveyourschool.org. This gives you all of the different options that are in your area: public schools, private schools, charter schools, and then how to access education
if you're a
savings
parent
accounts,
and
things
you
like
don't
that.
know the choices, this is the organization to go to.
This is where you go. Absolutely.
Very good. What about your organization? How can people help you and what you're doing?
Yeah, well, go to edchoice.org. We have a whole bunch of different resources. We have information about educational choice programs all across the country. And if you're interested in getting involved some way, you can go to our website, you can send me an email, or you can follow us on Twitter.
Jason, I could spend all afternoon with you. This has been quite a revelation. I mean, Arizona tends to get a reputation of being a cheap backwater where kids are ignored. And here we have programs that are more progressive than many states that are achieving tremendous results. It's quite a different perspective than what you normally get.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jason.